first Nocturne by Fauré embeds almost everything that we can dream about his language in music. His music talks rather than sings. His repetitive chords are austere, like in his Elegy for Cello. Though this austere accompaniment pulses more than beats, the beats of the rhythm, it's more about allowing the melodic line to blossom in a phrasing that has a direction that leads to eternity without a climax or a peak, though with a shape, be it very, very, very stretched, which gives this meaning to what Mademoiselle Boulanger, who studied with him, used to tell me. Fauré's lines don't end, and they don't diminish, nor do they ritenuto. In other words, they don't need an emphasis to end and close. They just sort of, I guess, she didn't say that, but I think of it, they just faint away in our dreams, hopes, or regrets. But they mark us so intensely when they're heard, when they're played. And another thing which is so beautiful is when he does the same pattern of repeated pumping chords accompaniment in the song after a dream, après un rêve. Has to be given naturally to the melodic line on the top, but there is the Fauréan melodic line of the bass. Oh yes, la basse chantante, la ligne. It's almost a horizon line, perhaps even some kind of a way of bringing the harmonic progression on rails, on tracks, without to have this vertical harmonization, but melodic bass line of it. For instance, in this case, and combined just with the melody. I start a Fauré piece, I always imagine a garden, because it's still but in motion. It's apparently a landscape obviously, soundscape obviously too, soulscape, that would be the right one, captured for the mood that the beauty of a flower brings to you through its symbolism and its connection to nature, and at the same time its seized moment rather than some kind of set in time. A rainbow in the sky, it seems to be almost infinite, yet you can see it and almost hold it in your hands, so to say, when you try to reach for it. And I think the phrasing of Fauré, which is of course chromatic but not totally, not diatonic but not always, in other words not chromatically throughout, it's almost what I like to call the semi-chromatic Fauré, which makes it very difficult to memorize because it's difficult to make a pattern out of it. He would have been more practical, but of course, thankfully he didn't, to do something to harmonize it, almost like in Chopin's Revetu Prelude. Chords, but chromatically dropping melody bass in bass. How beautiful that is. But in Chopin, it is chromatic almost everywhere. On the way down, chromatic. The kind of decay, the kind of lament. They say Berlioz, on the eulogy which he gave for Chopin's death, supposedly said Chopin kept dying all his works long with the chromatic dropping scale as a symbolism of death. Fauré's chromaticism is embedded in his modern, well, he's tonal obviously, but he uses a lot of modality, modalism, semi-chromatic modalism with plagal cadences. That would be très fauréen. Now, after the melodic line, the melodic bass line, what is sandwiched inside are the harmonic chords, simple triads. But each second is the echo of the first, so you could play it. There's no indication for it in the score, but then again, Let's forget these indications and these scores and these source materials and these editions and these other editions and these scholars and these other articles, because at the end of it, it comes down to intuition. Even if you go through all these readings, which of course is informative, but it doesn't really close the gap of the question of how did he want it. And ultimately, I believe, with age, it doesn't matter how he wants it. Not because we discard the importance of serving the intent of the composer, but because ultimately, while we play it, it becomes our piece. And so if it becomes our piece, we say it in our own way. Perhaps betraying it, perhaps it's lost in translation at the end of it. Perhaps. But ultimately, I think as a teacher, of course I try to identify all the reasons for which we can define which rubato is suitable here and there, and not only because of the tradition and the interpretations of others, but essentially, it's at the end of it is how you feel it. And that's probably the most convincing way to perform it. Because the doctoral, posturing way of playing it is pedantic. Of course, intuitive and only intuitive becomes very short-sighted. You don't see the long stretch of the line, you don't organize your phrase in a certain way. In other words, there is elaboration out of the inspiration. And it doesn't say, therefore, the second of the two chords in echo of the first within the pedal, we played inside the resonance halfway up in the key. Because then it could have also been that the first chord is the really soft, almost barely audible, and then the second one is the reinforcement, the reality of this daydream becoming true. And then going to the next. And therefore, in the flow of the second beat becoming the impulse to the next first beat, become a chain reaction: 2, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, rather than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are tempting interpretational, you could say, artificial devices, because after all, since the score has none of it hinted even, we could think that the chords are supposed to be evenly paced, perhaps like steps. And that because of the lento tempo indication, which is obviously slower than adagio, at ease, so lento, really take your time. But of course the melody has to have the time not to decay before the next beat after two half quarter notes. Had he written it in quarter notes for the accompaniment, we would hear. If he chose it in eighth notes, is because of the pace that he wants to give to the long melody stretched over on the horizon, while on the steps of the eighth notes. It gives a sense of peaceful, calm procession, while the melody seems to be heavenly, flowing all over the horizon and beyond. Of course, he could have chosen pedal and arpeggio. Formula of what if he had, one can digress quite far away. And some people consider that a loss of time. I personally find it very beautiful. Of course, not meaningful, not replacing the original. After all, we play what the composer wrote. And from there on, what it hints to our soul. But it doesn't hurt to imagine perhaps it already immediately colors it into another character by the intensity of these triplets. It's more like in the accompaniment of Chopin's Nocturne in E minor. If he had done the chords, well, he would have been Fauré, not Chopin. And if it was dotted rhythms, it might have been Schumann. And of course, we can justify our stylistic sort of colorization according to the what we know of the other works of the composers. So we can imagine. And all Schumann music is not dotted rhythm, and all Chopin music is not arpeggios, but most. And all Fauré music isn't either pounded chords, even if the examples I gave were purposely found for this. Anyway, it doesn't matter why he chose the accompaniment he did. After all, we will never know. And it's not of our business. It was in his cooking. We only have the meal, and the recipe rather, through the score, to cook the meal and to hope to serve it to our audience, saying this is the Fauré's Nocturne. And of course the choice of the tonality is part of it too, not to mention the tuning. The length of sound that the instruments can produce compared to, even today already, far more than in Fauré's time, could have meant that the perhaps lento in Fauré's time was a not. According to how long the melodic line can sustain until almost dropping the sound, and then you connect it to the next note before it becomes an accent, because then you strike it again and it sounds like. So I wonder if it wouldn't be a good analogy to imagine that the harmony is the perfume of the flowers and the melody is the flower itself. Therefore, in an analogy, the impression of the landscape and the landscape itself. The illusion that we get into our soulful, let's say, imagination that this sunset or this sunrise or this shadow light brings to us, and it talks to us at our humanity level, beyond the cosmic level and at the terrestrial level of elements. So let's try to imagine if the melody was in the middle. first barcarolle. And he didn't choose to do the first barcarolle. And same here, he could have chosen it, but he puts it on the top. It's such a sense of loneliness in this opening. Music that obliges you to introspect and think and feel and question yourself essential questions without any vanity. That middle section of the first page, open horizons as if to escape to another realm. Just before it returns to the dominant and concluding the flat minor, he could have escaped further. Kind of improvised digression, obviously he didn't do. And what I like to think about, if even it was that, he could have perhaps not done, but Franck would have done it, perhaps somebody else. Every time we do a slightly out of the track of the notes, everybody comes up with, oh, it reminds me of this, of that. Good. Fine. It's part of the cosmic nucleus. Okay, so anyway, the point of it is that he didn't go so far. He only hinted that he would. And then that's where he closes it. But it was a hope, and then no. Perhaps regret or acceptance. That's what Chopin does in the first ballade. G minor, dominant, relative major, but back. As if in Chopin's first ballade, the harmonic progression asks how we can get out of this condition, human, and we want to go above, beyond. We want to go where things are better, meaningful. I want to go high. I want to go where I am in osmosis with the elements. I want to rise. Is elevation? Is it spiritual? Is it humanistic? Whichever you choose. But the relative major is all this element of hope compared to the G minor, where they have diminished 7 to the 2nd degree. But the hint of it is more meaningful as a hope than the display of it, as he does in the 2nd page. Virtuosic arpeggio of a bel canto style aria, vocalise. Oh, sorry for singing. And then still returns. So even if you try to escape, you still have to return to your condition, to your choice. Or you have no choice. And so I think the fact that the music of the Romantic era expresses so much the desire of humanity to explore other it's not dynamics only, of course, with the instrument, but other dimensions of the humanity. Awarenesses, daydreams, eternal thoughts, connecting to some immaterial situations. It's always that hope. And so when the music tries to go somewhere and it tries to break the egg to make omelets, French expression, but then we close the shell of the egg. Acceptance is also very much of important thing in Fauré's music, all the way through his last Nocturne in B minor, number 13. His middle section is not in relative major as what I could expect in the situations to go to the other dimension of this hope for rising in D major, but rather in G sharp minor. emotion of tragic in this G sharp minor choice of tonality, but also the mood of anxiety, of hope, of moving. Everything is in the flow, everything is innerly turmoiled, and the melody tries to go through a trace of a line to another, and the bass line, as I said earlier in Fauré, always sort of almost as if he just threads of these melodic structures, and you feel like you're flowing constantly, never settles, in some kind of ostinato settlement. You're always in the go and in a sense of flow and in a sense of no peak, no moment of real melodic high point, and you say, okay, this was the climax, and then I drop after. No, it's a continuous flow of emotional, interpretational. I don't know if it is other than variations. Probably it is development of the thoughts, of the hopes, of the thought. Everything is in magma, moving magma, probably like a lava, yeah. And so at the end of this B section, he reaches. There is the D major chord of the relative major of B minor, which he didn't start the B section with, but finishes it with, in order to define it as the third. D major, B minor. He keeps the third resonating, almost like a brass. And now the B minor version of the third, returning to the acceptance. He chose the texture of a string quartet rather for a piano piece, where all the voices have equal importance. The melody doesn't prevail that much compared to some of his earlier nocturnes. Indicated who's what. Here, some 40 years later, step motions and suspensions and passing tones intertwining into each other, very close in the resonance and in the register, all centered in the middle of the keys of the keyboard. Makes it more of a string quartet on the piano. Whenever the first nocturne, it's clearly for piano, even if it's written in 4 parts. But these chordal triads let the melody blossom and sing, and the bass line appear. He doesn't write stems down to bring it out like Mademoiselle Boulanger would have been upset if I do too much of it, but it doesn't matter because it's so beautiful. I could sing it in my head, just like Glenn Gould hums Bach when he plays it, just to re-enhance even more the phrasing that he presents. Often when composers write in a single voice several parts, so to say, one hand, 3 parts rather, I meant, not single voice, single hand. The leading tone, the minor 6 with the resolution in major third, Picardy if you want. In thirds, and still softer than the melody with the decay. But because of the minor 6 appoggiatura, it has to be more painful, because it's a minor, half minor, since the major third is there. But what matters is that the A reaches after 2 long quarter notes, the B flat. And when you play it and you hear it, if carelessly played like this, it will sound the combination of the two. No, 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 no. Layered, followed, and displayed. But still filtered. As if he really wanted to separate the two, he would have written this way. We have the space between the melody and the harmonization, but he makes it in the same hand, in the same shape, almost under a sixth, not even an octave. And I still think that composers who do that, while clearly indicated with the stems up and down in this case for the right hand, yes, it is polyphonic, but the decay of the sound might bring a combination that perhaps the composer wanted cunningly, perhaps, or embedded as if, oh, you'll never know. I still think that it's important to aim at not combining them, but let them combine tiny bit as they happen to be. If you put some kind of fruit with another fruit, you combine them. It's like tastes that find common grounds, and all of a sudden you say, oh, this fruit goes well with this. So it is not only layered, but it's not totally compounded. Now this way you heard the A to B totally, but perhaps not enough of the minor hint of the minor 6 in the major third. And so if I want to bring more the minor 6 on the melody, or rather under, then I lose the A natural and I hear, or so I want to direct the attention of the listener so that they can follow the decay of the line while hearing the secondary voice, but integrate it into the secondary thirds. Whew. Other than that, it's easy, right? And Mademoiselle Boulanger would have said, without ritenuto. But now she would say it's not an andante. She would say you're indulging too much on each beat and you don't connect the line. I know. Je sais, mademoiselle. When I play, perhaps when I rehearse, mostly when I record, I have still the vision of my teacher sitting on the seat next to me with her radar ears, hearing everything, and me discovering what I discover under her tutelage. Well, she was would say you would never be able to play it right ever, but you could try, and you should, and never be satisfied. Fine. Sisyphus forever. Never-ending trying, failing and trying again, and perhaps accidentally succeeding. Calm, phrased, driven, organized, even, but not slowed down. It's always important to give the purpose of the end of the line, even if it's very slowly stretched in half notes and quarter notes in this lento tempo. Because if not, it's very tempting to create atmospheric moods. Oh, this chord is so beautiful, and this is very nice, it is heavenly. Oh, even softer. And you start aesthetically enjoying creating moods out of each harmony. But purposelessly. The purpose is not to play beautifully, prettifully, evocatively, dreamily, but meaningfully. What does it say? Where does it go to say it? As she would say also, the dotted rhythms are always problem. Either they're grace notish, either triplets. It is so unfortunately true. Because either we want to stress them, and then in fact proportionally in ratio they're too short, or then we want to sing them and then we take more time to express them and then become a triplet. And if you play the rhythm to make sure, you realize that the real delayed tense build their dotted rhythm, and the released, shortened 16th note, therefore stressedly short, instead of it becomes, has to have its own articulation, while it's part of the resolution of the tension that delays in order to create that sense of tension release, which by the decay of the piano instrument being percussive anyway doesn't happen, because you cannot make a crescendo on a held note. It would be ridiculous, even in vibrato. Nature of the instrument, obviously. I promised myself I won't sing when I teach. It's so silly to do, but I do. Serves me right. The 16th right in place. Now I lost it because the melody is rightfully rhythmical, but it dropped under the accompaniment, so soft it became. So if it's more brought out, oh, and now the top note is an accent, but now it's a triplet. That's totally out of time. 3, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4. 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, the more I try, more organize it, the more I try to display it, the more I try to bring it out, the more I try to arch it, the more I try to express it in the flow, but with the pulse, with the rhythm and the melodic line, and not giving the impression that the beats are there or the bars to interrupt or shred or fragment. All this is, the more I repeat it, the more you hear it, and the more you hear it, the more you hear things. But when you hear it in performance, you hear it once. And when you play it, therefore, in the performance, you play it once. So you have to have it so much in your head, in your soul, in your body, almost like organically in you, that when you display it at the get-go, you find the right tracking of the tempo with the right melodic flow, with the right dotted rhythm, with the right flow of the bass line. And not a little too much of this, a little too much of that, and you cannot restart, like in recordings. You have to do it once, and it has to be, if not perfect, because that's what we aim at, of course, we cannot reach, at least place ourselves so that we can merge into the piece right away in total unison with the piece. And the piece as we think of it, as we dream of it, as we understand it, as I said earlier, educated or intuitive. And it doesn't mean that somebody's interpretation, which will be different, will be wrong. Perhaps sometimes it's better to have somebody coming from an outside point of view without a tradition, a publication, and knowing articles. And we'll find some kind of a truth into it from another point of view. And I don't like the idea that, oh, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. This is what I think I reached at this point of my life, to think this is the right way, this is the right style for it, this is the right mood, because of this and that, other pieces of his or other art forms of the time period, and the sense of grace, the sense of display, the sense of delay, the sense of mourning, as well as the sense of longing. And the longing is the harmonization, delay with the suspensions. And I think it's very important to keep, no matter how much you think you know, you received, and in my case directly from the teacher who studied with the composer, no sense of authenticity that is granted, but rather some sense of authenticity, if any, with the piece, rather than per se the way he wanted it, which is earned every time you start it. I like to think it's like painting that vanishes as soon as you've painted it, and you have to restart it again. And it's such an ephemeral beauty which makes that Sisyphus type of endless try to search, to reach, and not to give up when you drop, and rise again and be resenting, say, no, I'm going to be resentful, I'm going to go through it, I'm going to try. One day I'll make that line through the end of that first page of the first Nocturne. Sorry, flower. That's the idea. That's forceful. It's more about trying every day to do better. You know, be a better human being, better colleague, a better parent, to deserve having been on earth and do something right. Not when you willingly do wrong, but when you willingly try to do right, it always doesn't go. Something goes wrong. Oh, the dotted rhythm and triplets, okay, I know, but the grace notes, and don't rush, and don't this, and don't that. Students get fed up with all these injunctions, because they feel like, what will I do? I want just to play it. And I feel like sometimes when I used to leave Mademoiselle Boulanger's lessons, I felt my head was not big enough, that's what I thought as a child, to harbor all the things that she told me about a single bar of a piece on which we were working. Thinking, how will I not forget? I'll drop something on the way, and then all of a sudden everything will fall. How to keep all this in mind. And so that's why they say teachers repeat themselves, which is unfortunately true. It's annoying as well for the student, because there is something in the quality of repetitivities that you get more in depth. You say the same things apparently, but there is a little bit of something else that in the sedation, so you feel like you're getting deeper in the soil. So perhaps you have to do repetitively the same gesture to plant, but then little by little you do it more right according to the exact placement. I mean, it's like cooking, it's like all crafts. You learn how to do it right, not only because of the book and the teacher, but also of your own experience. And sometimes it's it's that intuitive experience that is the one that on the spot while you perform the piece is so meaningful to the audience, because it's a sense of improvisatory, if you want to call it. Of course, not improvisatory in the sense when I digressed, but playing the piece as if you're telling it for the first time in your own words while it's his words. Just like a theater play or a script for a film. There is something about appropriation of somebody else's thoughts. Of course, it's art, artificial, but it becomes a meaning of life that people who watch, hear, or are moved by it, connect to their own life about it and say, oh, that means to me. As if, by analogy of the storytelling, you touch their own truths for which they search by themselves. And all this happens under cover of no words, just sounds. Not that universal language, easy word that is used for music, but rather that compelling self-search. Sehnsucht, as Beethoven used to say in German for that. That music, some music more than others, brings us to do that for ourselves as listeners, let less as performers. Of course, the performer is usually distracted by the fact of playing. I mean, the industry of playing should not take away from the mystery of the creation of the piece or the music or the world or the meaning. So that in one single musical phrase you can have so much more that is hinted than just what is there. And regardless if that is captured by the audience or not, or halfway or differently, or perhaps rejectedly, I don't like this. I prefer Scriabin. No, I had Wagner. Wagner is not, no, it's my God. No, not possible. Bruckner is better. And of course we have our favorites, and that's right, because we connect to some kind of musical idiom of them that talks to us, perhaps our culture, or perhaps even our love for it coming from another culture. It doesn't matter really, the culture at the end of it. I think we adopt it, we accept it, we connect to it. But when we play it, we deliver it through the filter of our own psyche, regardless how smaller it is than, let's say, Beethoven's. But it's ours. And the score doesn't talk by itself, no matter what. The music talks through our reflection of what it means to us. I'll never end being amazed by the power of introspection of music. It makes us better people because it makes us ask ourselves the questions in the intimacy of our own consciousness. And this kind of opening sets of the Nocturne, sets that atmosphere so beautifully, without to have the pretension of being philosophical, without to be dramatic, but I think very honestly speaking, at the human voice level, with those steps, if they are, with this melody that is stretched, this bass line that has movement that is almost as melodic as a melody, perhaps not totally, but closely. And the choice of E flat minor as a tonality, and this kind of nostalgic feel, which is on the surface easy to say, but perhaps it's not just only that. And if it was easy to say, it wouldn't need to be explained. It's spoken in notes. Or rather in the rests before the notes and after too.